If you want sustainable transformations, scalable transformations, diverse transformations, going from maybe analog to digital transformations, BPM is truly the foundation.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with various problem solvers and solving problems in organizations. We've got a number of different approaches and ways of going about this. But for this series, we're really looking at business process management, that process-centric approach and the value that it can bring to an organization in any sector, in any industry, at any level. And, these conversations are very fascinating. I always learn a lot. And today I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Julie Dimmick, who is a leading problem-solving professional across Australia and New Zealand. She's got a very diverse and broad background with a lot of experience in this space. So I'm very excited for this interview. Julie, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Daniel.
Well, one thing our audience loves to find out from the guest is a bit of context for who you are and your background. So could you take us back to when you were first introduced to BPM and then take us on a bit of a journey leading up to what you're doing today?
Well, actually, it was quite interesting. It was very early in my career. So let's go back a couple of decades when I first got introduced to BPM, and I had no idea what it was. So if you go back a few decades, gender equality was not the norm. We didn't have it. It was not a topic. And I started a very new role in sales, something I'd never done before. And I was told that there'd never be in this organization a female sales rep as the number one sales rep. So for me, that was like waving a flag to a bull. I thought, I have to do this. I have to succeed. But I didn't know how to. So I went and found out who was the number one sales rep. And I started to model his processes.
Right.
And I thought, wow, I've modeled his processes and I'm now actually close to being the number one sales rep. But modeling the processes was not good enough. To be the number one, I had to be better.
Right.
To improve the processes. And then over time, I caught the attention of the management team of how I could come in fresh off the street, not knowing anything about the products, the services, the industry, never having this background in my past. How could I be so successful at being a sales rep? But what they didn't realize is my little cluster of friends who came out of the same training room as me, I'd meet with every day, and we started to share all our knowledge, all our information, and we built this community of people and information. We managed the risks in our sales process together. We did it all together without even realizing we built a business process management cohort within the sales team. Now, of course, I'm very competitive. So yes, I did achieve in our state within a 6-month sales canvas, not a 12-month sales canvas, the number one sales rep. So the first time ever in the females to achieve that success. And I attribute that success to understanding the business processes, maturing those processes and managing my sales processes, and then sharing it across my cohort so that we could outshine and improve our sales methodologies we went through. And it truly has been the foundation of many successful careers I've had across various industries over the past 2 decades of my 21 years in life.
That's amazing. That's great. And how important is it having that community, that cohort of people? I love how you sort of put that there was this atmosphere or this environment where people could share and collaborate ideas and knowledge. And even though, different ones would have been very competitive, I'm sure that would have been delivered a huge amount of value to the organization and particularly the sales team.
It actually does, because you stop being an expert when you stop learning, and you learn from other people's experiences, what has worked for them, what hasn't. And when you start sharing that information out, you can rapidly grow and develop, and you can transform, and you can diversify and quickly react and respond to the situation that you're in. So having that cohort of people sharing the information, we're able to spread successes, what went really well, what didn't go really well. We can park certain ideas and concepts, and we can actually, I guess, throw ideas out there for people to play devil's advocate with in a very safe environment, because cohorts of people are people who generally do trust each other. And successful people want to hang around successful people. So it started to attract more and more people. So the groundswell was there, and the movement of business process management, the success, evolution of our processes was brought in from not only the people coming from the down, but it attracted the attention from the executives going, what's happening, what's transformed, and how do we actually, to some extent, take credit and ownership for this? And that's when you start bringing in your process owners as well. And
yes.
they journey.
Yes, that's great. That's great. And what would you see, like obviously over the last couple of decades that you've seen many different sort of transformation projects take place, what would you say are some of the biggest drivers for an organization to adopt BPM?
Look, I think a lot of the drivers to adopt BPM is done without them even realizing that's what they're doing.
Right, right.
Successful organizations doing successful transformations usually hire BPM experts without them even realizing that's what they're searching for.
Right.
So to transform, if you want sustainable transformations, scalable transformations, diverse transformations, going from maybe analog to digital transformations, BPM is truly the foundation. So I think for me, the successful organizations that are actually undertaking BPM and implementing BPM are the ones that are actually going to have that sustainable solution implemented, because it becomes a mindset. It's not, we tarnish BPM as a methodology or a framework or a business. It actually is a mindset. If you hire that mindset in, or you develop that mindset, you're then developing that culture and that DNA within the organization, and it just becomes a way of life.
Yes.
In a lot of organizations these days, safety is not, considered necessarily a process anymore. You don't outsource safety to, a third party. You embed that in your processes.
Right, right.
Technically a process that we should be embedded into an organization.
That's great. And when you mentioned there a sustainable solution, what is the difference between BPM becoming that sustainable solution and in other organizations where maybe it was picked up and adopted for a year or two or a period of time, or maybe it was just adopted on a project level? What's the difference? What's required or necessary to take BPM from just a once-off to that sustainable solution?
Mindset, culture, leadership, belief, and courage.
Right.
So if you've got the mindset that this is what we want to do, because we have the belief in not only our people, but our processes, our systems, and the outcome of what we're going to do, we have to have the courage to stick with it. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations just do it for a program or a year, and then something new and shiny comes along and it gets adopted, or the budget is, cut, or they've outsourced it. And it's great to outsource it to experts to help you implement it and to facilitate those conversations. But ultimately, the business needs to own it.
Right.
The success difference is really, a 2-year stint becomes quite expensive. You might get a short-term outcome, but it's not sustainable. You need to actually implement it. It needs to be, like I said before, it needs to become a way of life, a part of the DNA within the organization. And hiring in leaders with that mindset is one of the best things any organization can do, because everything that we do is a process.
Yes.
I was talking to a leader about 5 months ago, how do you know when your processes are successful? They said, well, we don't. until we hear about it. And I said, well, when you came into the office today, how many processes did you go through? And they sat back and they looked at me and they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, how many processes facilitated your entry into the workforce today? And they couldn't even answer that question. I said, well, let's just start about your initial onboarding, your performance management, your payroll, facilities management, security management, IT management. All of these are business processes, and they have been successful because you haven't complained about them. But how can you improve them? How do we communicate them? How do we monitor them? How do we manage the risk? Who owns those processes? So getting that understanding that everything is a process and then leading from that perspective, the process management of your business becomes so much more easier, and that discussion becomes so much more digestible.
Yes, right. And those points there that you mentioned, mindset, culture, leadership, would you say those are the main challenges an organization faces when adopting BPM?
I think so.
Yeah.
Because quite often if we're achieving our targets, the mindset is we're doing a good job.
Right.
So, and then the leaders are going, why change what's not broken? It's not necessarily about changing, it's about transforming and uplifting and improving on what we got. So you might need to change, yes, you might need to transform, you might need to shift, even if it is doing well, but can you do better? Can you sustain?
Yes.
Scale it? And are you ready for the board or the organization's direction for diversibility and transformation? No one knew in the last 2 years or 2 years ago what the world was going to go through.
Mm-hmm.
If you were business ready back then.
Right. And when I'm looking at your processes to improve them, there's obviously, you can incrementally tweak your processes. You can radically transform and innovate your processes. Obviously, what the work we do as BPM practitioners, it needs to align with the overall strategic objectives of the organization. It needs to align to that strategy layer. But how do you know how much you can get out of your processes, so to speak? How do you know when, okay, we need to go back to a blank canvas and we need to rethink the way we're delivering value, as opposed to those sort of like daily continual incremental tweaks?
That's actually a really good question. And I guess the answer I'll give you is the organizations that have implemented successfully BPM or have started on the journey of BPM will know.
Right. Okay.
Because they'll have that information at hand. They'll know exactly how the business processes are being managed, how mature those business processes are, and what it's going to take to get them from A to B or A to C without having to digress through to B or Z.
Right.
The organizations that haven't considered BPM, haven't got the framework, or may actually be doing elements of BPM without having the governance over it and the true understanding or the executive mindset or the leadership mindset of BPM, will need to actually probably hire in experts to help facilitate that discussion and that discovery. Is it an incremental small tweak, a PDCA type of thing, or a zero-based design? Are we going back to scratch, starting from zero?
Yes.
And that's really dependent on the maturity level of that business at the time.
Right. Now we have a wide sort of range or diverse group of people that listen to this podcast series, from the senior leadership level through to your BPM specialists and practitioners and process analysts. For those people that are working currently in an organization and they're hearing you talk about how important mindset is, how important this BPM mindset is for there to be success with a BPM implementation. How do you foster that internally? And I guess especially if you're not in a senior leadership position, can you foster this? Or like how do you gain momentum for BPM when maybe you are just a small team? Maybe you do have people around you that they have a negative perception of what BPM is, but maybe because of their previous experiences. But how do you, I guess, start to foster that BPM mindset internally?
One of the things that I've personally always done is I tell stories.
Yes.
Telling stories, whether you're at the grassroots or, you're talking to the board or you're talking to, at a town hall, storytelling is the best way. But a prime example of how BPM started in one of the state government departments that I've worked with in the past as a facilitator, I was brought in to help their BPM momentum, was a BA, a business analyst. He knew that something was not quite right. He couldn't put his finger on it. And he knew that the ICT department leading the business processes just didn't feel quite right. But that's always done it. I mean, we're a government department. We don't change. We don't transform. We've been doing it this way for 30 years, and we're not going to change because it takes forever and a day. So what he did is he went, and funny enough, he started with just a Google search. And he Googled, how can I improve what we're doing here? And he came up with all these different answers, and he just kept refining and refining and refining. And one day he spoke to the project board and said, this project can't be successful until we get our business processes right. And we in ICT cannot own these business processes. We need to bring the business on the journey.
Right.
Do that because it was, a culture that hasn't changed for quite some time. So they did outsource, and yes, they outsourced to someone like myself who came in and helped facilitate that, did an assessment on where they were at and helped them build the roadmap. But it took the courage of one employee to stand up and say, I think we need to change here. I don't know what it is. I think we need to change. And then it took the courage of the leadership to actually listen and say,
Right.
You're right, something does need to change. We don't know what it is. We're not the experts, and it's okay not to be an expert.
Yes.
So, I think it just takes that one little spark to light that fire. And
Yes.
it does take, exceptional leadership, the bravery and the courage to get in there and say, you know what, we can do this better, and we need to hear our people. After all, our people are our assets.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's really good. And obviously, from a senior leadership point of view, they're going to want to understand, well, what value is this going to drive? They will generally want to be understand the tangible benefits. If we, invest our money here, what's the return going to be? What will that mean for the project or for the department or for the organization? And being able to share stories, as you say, and case studies and examples of where it's been adopted and where it's worked well, and what the tangible sort of outcomes have been from that will go a long way in getting that buy-in. And I know that we had a brief chat before we dived into this interview today, so I know that you've got plenty of stories to tell about, I guess, wins or where BPM has been adopted. And it has delivered significant value to that organization. Can you share a couple of those stories with us? Because I think that's something that the audience will find fascinating.
One of the things, as we were talking just a little bit earlier, that came to my mind was in January to June, I was flying in and out of Sydney every week on week, and I became familiar with the process, the travel process in a COVID environment. Check in, check out, jump on, jump off, mask on, mask off, keep your distance, all of that process that we're all so familiar with, living and working in a COVID environment. One of the things that I noticed in June with the New South Wales outbreak, I flew in. I realised then and there that the COVID environment was on a turn. Intuitively, when you're in an environment as a leader, you should become highly observant of what's happening around you. I got to my office, I did the process I needed to do, I sent my people home, but I also then was smart enough to adjust my business process for the week, knowing that I could work remotely. I went straight back, booked my Virgin flight, got on the next flight out. So I was only in Sydney for about 2.5 hours. Now, one of the changes that I noticed was every week leading up to this particular point in time, the Australian Federal Police would actually do their border assessment inside the airport as you exited to go to the baggage carousel. But not this day. They'd actually moved their reviews of the passengers onto the tarmac.
Right.
So I asked the AFP officer, I said, why have you done this? Because it was very unfamiliar. I hadn't experienced it for the last 6 months. It was a new process, and being process minded, I needed to understand the why behind why they had changed the business process that they were currently undertaking. And yes, it was a business process, whether we see it or not, or we like that or not, it was their business process. And the officer turned around and he said to me, he said, you know what? We've done this because what we've noticed is if we actually push this process out further, we're actually bringing in risk to the process, because people get off the tarmac, they walk through the airport, they get a coffee, they get lunch, they go do a bit of shopping before they go and exit the airport, which actually increases the spread or the potential to spread COVID. So we've actually brought the process forward. And I was absolutely astounded. And I thought, wow, they really understood the impact of their processes, not only to their workforce, but to the broader Queensland community.
Mm.
And it was quite amazing. You know, there was a couple of other people standing around listening to me going, oh, well, that's really good. But they hadn't actually cottoned on to this was the process.
Right. That's great. And looking at that example, obviously their focus there was managing risk. Do you find that organizations will adopt BPM more so from that perspective to manage risk, or more from, say, looking for opportunities, creating the future? I had a conversation with Michael Roseman a number of months back now, and which was one of the episodes in this series, and he spent a lot of time talking about innovating, creating the future, and how more organizations need to do that. Do you think that more organizations sort of adopt BPM to manage risk? Are you seeing it's 50-50? What are you noticing?
No, I actually don't see them using BPM to manage risk, which is actually a shame, because a part of it is risk management. When you process, you're managing risk. What I often find is they actually have a risk management framework or a risk management team that manages the risk, and they're actually looking after it independently as opposed together.
Okay.
Through the BPM framework. I think that if organisations looked at BPM as a way to support risk management, they'd be able to be successful in risk management and business continuity, and also improving and optimising. So to answer your question, a lot of the times I find that BPM is actually implemented as a way to solve a quick problem,
right,
or capitalise on dollars return on investment.
Yes. Yeah, okay. And say that, there's many different people that will be listening to this, and they'll be coming from different contexts, different backgrounds, different organizations. For those that are, I guess, embarking on their BPM journey, where do you start? What process do you start with? How do you identify those critical or core processes that are going to give you those quick wins so that you can, prove value in it and get further funding, further budget, further resources to continue doing more of this work?
Yeah, so what I would recommend any organisation do is to do a business maturity assessment before they go anywhere.
Right.
Look at their business processes, look at how mature they are. And I would also recommend that you outsource that. Don't have your own people doing an assessment on themselves, because you'll find that it's biased, or they may not be as confident in putting in black and white some of the findings.
Yes.
So always start with a process maturity assessment on your business.
Yes, right.
And that to me is a core point. And do it every year. Once every year, I would recommend that you go and do, a proper and thorough assessment of where you are as a business, because that does lead into your strategic imperative. It should guide exactly where your organisation is going to go, and be one of those leading indicators into how successful your business imperatives are going to be.
Yes, right. And I guess, it's providing that transparency that you need as an organization to understand, well, where are we at right now, and how far off are we? What's the gap between where we are and what we want to be? And you don't want any sort of internal, politics or conflict to get in the way of that objective view of, well, where are we actually? So, you know, having this objective perspective to come in to analyze what's going on, I can see how, you know, it's giving the leadership a very clear idea of where they're at.
Yeah, all transformations that I lead, I always start with the process maturity.
Right.
Where is the business processes? Where's the architecture? Where's the risk? Where's the process owners? Where's the documentation? How often do we look at it? How often are we accessing it? How often are we assessing the people that are actually performing the tasks? How often do the leaders go to Gemba?
Right.
So these are all the questions I ask whenever I start any transformation, because it does give me, even though they may not have done a business process maturity assessment, it gives me an idea of the types of conversations I'm yet to have with the organisation to help them successfully transform or
Yes.
to scale or diversify or whatever, you know, my remit is at the time.
Right. And obviously, like, getting buy-in from senior leadership, as we've talked about, you know, being able to prove the value, being able to share stories and examples of where it's worked in the past. You know, it's not just about getting senior leadership on board, but you've got all of the process participants, all the process performers that, you know, as you're going through this transformational piece, it's their role or their job that's going to be changed, whether it's, you know, changing their action, like the activity or the tasks that they do from a day-to-day basis to something slightly different, or you might even be removing it completely, giving it to some sort of automated system and then deploying that resource elsewhere. You know, a lot of change there, potential turbulence. How do you bring those process participants along for that journey so that then they're not, you know, giving you resistance to what you're trying to do and trying to achieve, but in fact the opposite? How do you get them on board with what's happening and even coming to the party with their own ideas and suggestions and improvement ideas?
One of the tactics I've deployed in the past, obviously change management's 101. Everything that we do, change management, it's like BPM, it should be embedded because we continuously change, whether it's a small incremental change or a large scale change, we're continuously changing. But when you start to actually have a heart-to-heart conversation with the people, really sit down and understand where they're at, why they're doing a particular process, and how can they improve the processes, and why we need to, as an organisation, align. I believe in systemic alignment across organisations, enterprise alignment. So once we start to have those conversations and let the people drive, but not just let them talk to you, listen to it. And as a leader, you know, you sit there and you have to say, I've heard you, and therefore I am going to do X, Y, and Z. Now, it may be what the employees want to hear or not hear. That's okay, as long as they're actually hearing and listening to the experts. The people doing the processes are the experts in the processes, not us that sit in a corner office with our vases on our table, and our coffee's being delivered every hour. That the people who are doing the processes are the true leaders in actually process transformation. All we do is we rubber stamp it, we accept it, we apply it, and then we manage and monitor it, from an executive level. Right. So we need to have that unity, almost a flat organization when it comes to processes. Yes, you have process architecture and hierarchy and all of that, your process leveling, but from a people point of view, it's all flat. We're all in the same processes working towards the same organizational objective.
Yes, right. That's great. That's really good. I like the idea of empowering people, leveraging the workforce to be able to be in an environment where they can bring their own ideas and suggestions to the table, because as you were saying, they're the real process experts. They're the ones that are in the position that can identify and recognize the pain points and the problems, and where, we've had a customer who they're getting angry now, they're getting frustrated. It's because, they've been on a very complex process. Maybe this is something that we need to look at and actually I've got a few suggestions, I've got a few ideas, having that space where you can leverage them. I mean, it certainly avoids any type of bottlenecking that could possibly come in the way. I was having a conversation a week or two ago with a motor insurance organization down in Sydney, and they've sort of created this internal process cohort, kind of like what you were saying at the start, actually, where they were bringing all of these subject matter experts into this monthly meeting, and they were, there were only 4 meetings in, but they're getting 40, 50 people along to it, because people want to be part of this group. They feel empowered to identify pain points, problems in their processes, and then they're equipped with the tools they need to make those improvements and changes. And it's a very small process team, but by empowering the people and leveraging the people, they're able to do so much more than if they just sort of bottlenecks the whole thing and everything had to be implemented, or any solution could only come from this small team. So I think that's great advice for the people that are listening to this.
Thank you.
And so looking at the future of BPM now over the next 2, 3, 5 years, and obviously, well, actually, maybe before we get into the future, I think as you mentioned with your example there before with COVID, it's obviously, turned the business landscape on its head over the last 18 months. It's forced a lot of organizations to think differently about how they're doing things, how they're delivering value. For some organizations, it's provided an environment where they can thrive. For others, it's really made things difficult for them. How has BPM played a part over the last 18 months?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because I think there's a lot of organisations that have been reactive to the last 18 months, almost gone into survival mode.
Right.
How do we survive? How do we do this? How do we do that? How do we keep our doors open? How do we pay our mortgages? How do we pay our staff? But just in that, how do we? There's a process. Whether it be applying for government grants, negotiating with landlords, having those discussions with their staff on how do we actually, transform or potentially, digitize our workforce? How do we change the way that we work? All of that is a part of, BPM. So some are obviously better at it than others. Some have labelled it. I prefer not to use a label. I don't like calling BPM merely because, people have got their own bias or unconscious belief of what it truly is, but they're actually doing it without even realizing it more successfully than others. So I think it's actually played a big part in the last, 12 to 18 months of business, government, society, and our way and our ability to bounce back and adapt and to adjust as we go through, the next 12 to 18 months, because we do know that not only have we got COVID right here, right now, running rampant through a couple of our, big economic hubs, New South Wales and Victoria, but we've also got to have a look at how do we actually sustainably bounce back to whatever the future looks like. And we don't know what that future looks like as a society. But as organisations, I think we can start to apply a common sense approach to what our business could look like by owning our processes, by utilising this information and the data and the information that we've got at hand on how to transform, scale, diversify our organisation, our resources, our way of working to a future state. So I think BPM plays a big part in that. And more, if you go on to Seek or if you go on to LinkedIn, which is what I tend to do to see what's happening within industries, you find more and more organisations looking for BPM experts without actually labelling them as BPM experts. So all the skill sets that they're looking for are people who have a background in BPM.
Right.
I think there's a big need. They're not understanding what they're actually necessarily looking for and able to label it, but that's what they're actually asking for. So I think it plays a part in the future of Australia's success.
Yes, right. And in looking at that future over the next 2, 3, 5 years, obviously there's a lot of when new technologies are introduced to the market, there's a lot of hype and a lot of a lot of sort of promotion around these different things. And some organizations adopt and implement them well, and other organizations adopt and implement them not so well. And then you've obviously got the fundamentals that, you know, we know that there are a lot of organizations that still need to put the fundamentals in place. They still need to foster that BPM mindset. They still need to garner that sponsorship from the senior leadership. But from your perspective, over the next 2, 3, 5 years, what sort of trends are you noticing? Where would you be encouraging organizations to invest their time, effort, and energy?
Okay, so each year I do the top 5 trends to tap into.
Right.
Each year, so I release them in January every year. So this year I said the top 5 trends for any organisation to tap into is cybersecurity.
Right.
And the reason being is we're digitising at a very rapid pace and a faster pace than what we ever have. We've got people working from home, and that is actually a part of BPM anyway. It's a business process.
Right.
So to do cybersecurity well, you need to have BPM in hand.
Right.
They do go hand in hand. So all my top 5 trends actually have BPM as the framework or the foundational element for them to be successful. I also have organizational psychology. Yet again, another process. Because it's a soft skill or a soft element, we don't actually acknowledge it as a business process. But when you start looking at the policies and the systems and the tools that we tap into for our organizational psychology, there's a business process that's actually underpinning it.
Right, right.
Accessing the EAPs or taking time off for work to deal with, issues or stresses or worries or, ill family members or whatever it may be, BPM actually builds that framework. So when you start looking at, operational excellence, once again, BPM, everything that I've put up there actually has a fundamental or an element that is supported by the practice of BPM. Now, whether you're doing it good or not, it doesn't matter as long as you start that journey and start it today if you haven't already.
Yes, yeah. That's great. And obviously there's, we can be working on our internal processes, what our internal employees are working on from a day-to-day basis. Then there's the whole customer experience and customer journey side. So, well, what are our customers? What are the tasks and the steps and the activities that we're encouraging them to go on as part of their journey? And some organizations, do you see there's an emphasis on one over the other? Are you seeing, would you encourage organizations they need to spend more time on customer experience or spend more time on what's happening internally? I mean, ultimately everything is driving or should be focused on the customer regardless, but where would you encourage organizations to sort of spend more time, or are you seeing, oh no, there's a good split at the moment in terms of how they spend? Obviously every organization is different, so it's a very broad question. But
yeah, look, it depends on the industry at the moment. It has really been industry led on what they need to do and I go back to this survival mode. Unfortunately, there's a lot of commentary out there where industries are not going to survive, businesses are not going to last. So it's almost a defeatist attitude that we know that we're going to have to let people go.
Right.
I would urge and encourage all the businesses out there to actually have that chat with their staff member and say to their staff member, how can we sustain, scale, and grow through this? How can we transform? How can we change? What can we do differently? What can we do better? What do we not need to do? Okay, because if you don't have your staff, you're not going to be able to service those customers anyway.
Yes, right.
Even if you go digital or you move to more of a technology-based solution, I think people out there, and more so we're seeing it, are wanting that human interaction. So organizations would probably be well advised to have that human interaction even as they digitize to help their customers transform, because as we start to isolate, and we've all been in lockdown in some format over the last 12 or 18 months, we do like that human connections. And, what you're doing at the moment, Daniel, is, you've really picked up these digital video forums where we can connect, we can embrace each other, we can talk, we can communicate, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And we've kept that human element going as opposed to writing a blog.
Right.
I love blogs. I'm a big blogger. But I think that, having that human connection is important. And it's also important to our staff members and to our customers and also to the industries that we work in. I think every industry should be building that cohort on how to, as an industry, service their customers. And remember, a lot of your staff members are a potential customer as well.
Very true. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think it's something that we do often forget as BPM practitioners. I can't speak for everyone, but understanding that we are also consumers, we are also customers. When, as you were saying, as you have said throughout this interview, like everything we do is a process. When I woke up this morning and got ready for work, I followed a number of different processes to get ready. And so I can look at what I'm doing and analyze it and see, okay, is this the process that, that sets me up for my day well? And it's not necessarily all about being the most efficient, but does it prepare me to be the most buoyant, to be the best version of myself for the work that's ahead of me for the day? But for those that have been listening to our conversation and maybe you've piqued their interest in BPM or for their organization, that, hey, this is something that we need to consider and take seriously, because there's potentially a lot of opportunity that we're missing out on by not understanding and managing our processes well. For these people, what would you encourage them to do next? What are the next steps they should be taking? Is it more research and education? Is it finding mentors? Is it getting third parties in to do that maturity assessment? What are the next steps that this individual that's listening to this should be doing if they really want to drive BPM in their organization?
I think all of the above. But start with the why.
Right.
What is it? What is your core driver? Why do you need to do this? And what are you seeing? Who is going to be impacted? Who do you need to take on the journey? Is it internal? Is it external? Because sometimes, obviously all your internal people you will take on the journey, but do you need to bring in external resources and to help facilitate this discussion? And notice I use the word facilitate. BPM practitioners like myself that come in and work with organisations, we do with, not do to.
Right.
So look for the do with practitioners who will do it with you, not do it to you, and have that mindset. So really look for the reason why. Why do you want to do this? And why do you not want to do it? It's kind of like those customers I was talking to. Funny enough, you mentioned insurance before. I was looking, at the assessment of all my insurance agencies, and I've got several mortgages and all of that. So everything's insured. All my properties are insured. So I was doing a bit of an assessment recently, and on the internet, and then I was ringing around, and one of them turned around and the customer service of their online process. I thought, this is really great. I can get all the information, get my free quote online with a click of a button. So I followed the whole process, 10 minutes in, click the button, and then the screen pops up. You're now going to receive in a minute a phone call from one of our people. And I went, wow, they never told me that. They said, click the button and I'll get my quote. So here I am as a potential customer, now extremely disappointed with the process because I felt misled.
Right.
All happened, and I was really not at that particular point in time interested in getting the quote. I was interested in improving that online process. Started to talk to the telephone sales consultant about the process. They said, well, I don't know, I've never done it. And I went, wow, okay. So I said, can I now speak to someone that I can talk to about this process and the reason why I felt so compelled to do it? And at the end of it, I turned around and I said, it is not the customers you've got in your front door. Let's have a look at all the ones that are now walking past your front door. And there is your compelling why. Funny enough, I did get a phone call back 2 weeks later from that agency, that insurance agency, and they asked me, what I would actually do to actually improve that process, because the person looked me up on LinkedIn to see my background because I made a very compelling argument on what they needed to do to fix this process. And I said, well, look, it's just one line. It's a simple one line. You may make it. It was in the small fine print at the bottom of the internet portal that you would miss when you had all this big white bold print across the screen. And they said, if we just made it bigger, and I said, yes, it would have solved potential customer dissatisfaction. So I think, understanding your why as an organization and having a look at who are the customers you do want, who are the customers that you don't want, why don't you want these particular customers? Because sometimes as an organization, we don't want particular customers within our business.
Right.
And that's perfectly okay. So start with the why, be brave, have courage, and more importantly, bring business processes into every leadership discussion. Put it on every JD, put it into, your role descriptions. You are being employed to do this business process. Put it front and center, and don't be afraid of a business process, because believe it or not, you're doing probably 60 of them a day without even realizing it, or you're being impacted by 60 of them a day without realizing it. So let's just make it a conversation and start from there. Have that conversation.
That's amazing. Well, Julie, it's been an absolute privilege of sitting down with you and having this conversation. I've certainly been taking a lot of notes here, and I'm excited to go watch this interview back through and review a number of the topics that we've covered today. And I know that the audience will be listening to this, they will have gleaned a lot from our conversation as well. I think being able to take BPM and bring it to life with tangible examples of how it can be adopted, how improvements can be identified. I think, just the conversation today, it will have piqued people's interest and would have sparked ideas in what they can do in their own organization, how they can implement it, how they can start adopting this process-centric approach. So I just want to thank you on behalf of the Process Pioneers community for sitting down with me and for having this chat today.
Thank you, Daniel. And can I just say to everyone, keep smiling, keep shining, and keep connected.